Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and Redbridge's Kos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. G'day, welcome back, Curtinistas. Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the JCRC's podcast of politics, culture and ideas. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, co-host. Welcome to the one, the only Kos Kung Fu Samaras. G'day, Kosy.
Good morning, mate.
Episode 49. We are building up to episode 50 next week, Kos, but it's been a big week in Australian politics, big week for the mighty JCRC. We had a gala dinner last week with Senator Tim Ayres, a wonderful occasion here in Melbourne, and we had a seismic state election on the weekend on Saturday. Today, we're unpacking what happened either in South Australia, the not unexpected triumph of Peter Malinauskas. We might dive into some of the potential risks over the horizon. South Australia and the Liberal Party's existential crisis, the surge of One Nation, and what it means both for federal politics and for the big Victorian state election coming up in November this year. Because it wasn't just a huge loss for the centre-right legacy party. The Liberals didn't come second. They came third and fourth and last across huge parts of South Australia. They were decimated in metropolitan Adelaide. Look at some of the primaries. I'm not sure whether they're still accurate. When I looked at them last night, we had the ALP on 38.5%. One Nation, as predictions came true, Kos. They have eclipsed the Liberals, sitting on a primary of around 22%. The Liberals less than 20%, on 19%. The Greens polling 11% and others 10%. This, in vote terms, is the best result for Pauline Hanson since the 1998 Queensland state election, when the party burst into state parliament with nearly 23% of the statewide primary vote and winning 11 seats. Take us through where things sit in hard numbers. Not everyone is like us, Kos. They're not all political nerds sitting there watching the vote tallies come through. What are the hard numbers? How many seats do the parties hold? How will One Nation end up polling? And how many seats will it take in the lower and upper house?
You mentioned 1998. That was Queensland, right? And it's still to this day the one state that you would expect One Nation to perform really well if it's surging. The one state that you would identify in this country that where One Nation shouldn't do well is South Australia. And even up until election night, we still thought that they could still perform well and eclipse the Liberal Party and not win any lower house seats because the limitations associated with where their seats are situated and the size of the population. But the trends are the trends, and it's pretty clear that what we're seeing nationally is now writ large in a live ballot. The atypical One Nation voter is someone with a TAFE or trade qualification, is someone that lives in the outer suburbs or regions of the country. We saw that writ large in the results. The atypical Labor voter is a person possibly with a university education, possibly of diverse background, working in various occupations from managerial to professional to health to education. And the atypical Liberal voter now is a 65-year-old who owns their home outright and who has intergenerational wealth. And that's a very small group. And that's what's left, defending the Liberal Party and holding up the team in some key seats in South Australia.
How many seats do you think One Nation will end up winning? Because I think they're in the race for 4.
Yeah, look, I think
one or two in the upper house.
They'll definitely will secure seats in the upper house. In the lower house, it's probably 1 or 2, but that's not really what we're looking at here in terms of their seat presence. It's what they've done to the body politic of South Australia. And if we extrapolate the trends that we're seeing in South Australia to a state like Victoria or even New South Wales or even Queensland, they will win a lot of state seats off the back of that trend.
Yeah, I think Anthony Green described that they're on a search and destroy mission.
Well, they are, absolutely. And this notion...
And we've been warning it. You've been,
yep.
You and I have been banging the drum for more than 12 months here.
Well, the irony is that for the last 6 months, the coalition at a federal level had embarked on an anti-immigration narrative to stop the bleed to One Nation. But then when you speak to One Nation voters or those who have got a history of voting Liberal and gone to One Nation, the number one reason they're moving to them, they're sick of the duopoly. Immigration as an issue is way down the order. So they basically, what the coalition's done to itself is it's burned all its remaining capital within diverse Australia, chasing votes that were never voting on that issue in the first place. It's a completely madness, what they've done to themselves. So that's what we're looking at. South Australia, the Labor government, very popular, was able to hold its own. In states like Elizabeth, for those who don't know, Elizabeth is a suburb in Adelaide that used to house the Holden factory, which produced cars in this country, closed down along with the rest of the automotive industry back in the early 2010s.
Yes, this is the town where Jimmy Barnes
that's right.
Grew up.
Yes,
this is where
yes.
Flame trees,
Yes.
the great cold chisel track flame trees.
Yes, and also he's actually written a song about it too, around the time when the Holden motor plant shut down. One Nation ran second to Labor. The only reason I would argue that Labor was able to hold on to that seat is because of the popularity of that Labor government.
Was it? I think it was forced of preferences there?
Yes, it didn't win on primary.
Yeah, which again is unprecedented
in that part of the world. Yes.
Yeah.
The state seat of Giles, where Whyalla is situated, very similar story. Again, Labor seat, historically very safe. One Nation running second. So that's the pattern we're seeing, where One Nation starts to run second in a whole bunch of seats.
How many seats will the Libs be left with in the lower house?
At the moment, they're on 4.
Is that party status? Is that official party status?
I don't know. Don't know what their rules are.
It's a devastating result, though, Kos.
Well, yes, they're a minor party now.
They are a minor party.
And the problem is that our entire media establishment and political commentariat still treats them as a major party, maybe because obviously they have been that for some time. But we are now rapidly moving into a new era where they are not the second largest party. They are third, and he sometimes run 4th in many ballots.
We are moving into an era, Kos, but this has also been on display for a number of years now, in that Labor is winning large electoral victories. We saw this in 2022 and in 2025, and it's had less to do with a huge sea change, huge swing towards Labor. In fact, there was a small swing against the Malinauskas government, but Labor is benefiting from the implosion.
Yeah, the collapse of the
coalition vote.
Right. Yeah, in 2022, 2025 federally, the 2022 Victorian state election, the 2023 New South Wales state election, most elections that we're seeing where Labor wins, it's purely because the right side is collapsing and restructuring itself. Yeah, I would not rule out a world where we are going to use the word coalition, but One Nation will be a significant play in that in years to come, where if Conservatives want to govern, they will have to form a coalition across 3 parties, possibly 4 at a federal level. So LNP coming out of Queensland, the Liberal Party in what's left of it in New South Wales and Victoria, and One Nation. And I say that in terms of Victoria and New South Wales, what's left of it, as in the Liberal Party, because the other thing that we saw in South Australia is now both in Western Australia and in South Australia, they are almost non-existent as a political party. 4 seats there, handful left in Western Australia, completely pushed out of Perth and Adelaide, both at a federal and state level. I mean, they've got 1 seat left, I think, in Adelaide now, a state seat. They've got none left at a federal level. That's a structural collapse. If you're suddenly with 2 states across the country almost non-existent, that's a pretty big warning sign.
Well, I think we're beyond warning signs there, Kossie.
There's a few more. That's right, correct.
But you talk about this potential alliance, but that has the potential to do even more damage to the previous base in the educated professional middle class. We can see the results. Labor is poised to win seats from the Liberals like Unley, Hartley, Colton, Davenport, Morialta.
Yes, Davenport's a really good example that I wrote about it on the weekend. That the common thread about Davenport is it's got a large number of younger professionals with university degrees. It used to be a Liberal heartland electorate, very similar to, at a federal level, Bennelong in Sydney, Menzies in Melbourne. These seats they're losing now, and it's indicative of the problem they're facing, and that is they are getting squeezed from both sides. Labor, Teals, Greens are eating the left flank, and One Nation's eating their right flank.
What would it take then, Kos? With preferential voting, One Nation's performed extremely well, and I think for Laborites listening, watch results like Elizabeth closely here. What would it take for One Nation, and then we're going to talk about Victoria a little bit later, what would it take for One Nation to convert this strong primary vote and being clearly the biggest opposition party, what would it take to convert those votes into seats? Or are we going to see this permanently play out as this sort of cannibalisation of the centre-right?
Yep. Okay,
right,
so
right-wing vote?
On the right side of politics, if One Nation wants to take seats off the Liberal Party or the National Party, its primary vote needs to be in the high 30s. It's got the same problem that the coalition had faced versus Labor for years, and that is it cannot rely on preferences. And the Liberal Party is going to survive in a number of electorates in South Australia purely because of Labor preferences and preferences from the left. And again, this highlights a massive danger point again for the Liberals, because without the left, they will have no seats. That's the irony. Right, without the left, those 4 seats that are currently sitting on their column, they wouldn't hold them. So that's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, One Nation versus Labor. We can talk about the states of Elizabeth. Without Mallee, that Labor primary would potentially have dropped below One Nation, and Liberal preferences coupled with One Nation primary votes would be enough to win a seat like that. We will see that a lot more in Victoria, and we can talk about that later on, about the detail of what that could look like. But look, it's the states that are Werribee, for example. At the by-election in Victoria, Labor lost 16% of its primary vote. It all went to independents. Now, I wouldn't rule out that in that environment that repeats itself come November, but it coalesces around the One Nation instead. And One Nation either runs second or first, and then Liberal preferences elect a One Nation MP. So that's how that can happen. So they will get there. They will probably do a lot more damage structurally to the Liberal Party, win equally the same number of seats off both Liberals and Labor, though. But the structural damage will be far deeper for the Liberal Party, because what they also will do is further ostracise the Liberal Party from its left flank, because the Liberals will need to respond to the right threat. So in Victoria, the Liberals will find it really difficult winning seats off Labor that are in inner middle urban parts of Melbourne, and there's a lot of marginal seat territory there. And then in the outer suburbs, it's 3-way contest, and it's a toss of the coin as to who wins them. So pathway to victory, even in a state like Victoria, is very difficult to see for the Liberal Party at the moment in the coalition.
Before we move to Victorian state politics, Kos, I know you've got a bee in your bonnet this morning. Are we actually looking at witnessing a similar result? There's a lot of water to come under the bridge for the next federal election. If we were to see similar primary vote trends, what would the next federal election look like for the coalition?
Yeah, I would say you could see how One Nation could win up to a dozen seats. I know there's been some analysis put out that they're going to win 50 plus seats. That's just fantasy.
Yeah, no.
That's never going to happen. For the same dynamic we just witnessed in South Australia, right? They need to get a primary vote well into the high 30s and 40s. Labor voters do not preference One Nation as that model predicted wrongly. They preference the Liberal Party over One Nation. In fact, we touched on this in a previous podcast. Amongst Labor voters, Pauline Hanson's satisfaction rating is negative 57. They do not like One Nation. They're not going to preference One Nation. They're going to preference the Liberal Party. So hence we're going to see a repeat of what we saw in South Australia, but about a dozen seats. And some of them may come off Labor. There will be seats that One Nation will put Labor under pressure. I'm thinking of the Hunter, Patterson, those sort of seats.
It'll be an interesting test. It's it obviously doesn't look like the rest of Australia, but there's going to be a by-election in Farrer as Susan Ley, their former opposition leader, departed the scene. Labor's not standing a candidate. Obviously, the Libs are running. They only just pre-selected their candidate, Reza Budkowski, a week ago. She looks like she's going to be running third in the seat. And you've got One Nation and you've got an independent. The Libs have been running around talking about as a teal when she doesn't really, when she may well sort of receive some Climate 200 funding, but they've got a really tricky decision about who do the Libs preference? Who would they actually prefer to win in Farrer?
Well, obviously they'll prefer the independent. Because once One Nation starts taking territory and forming beachheads, that's the start of a pretty significant decline in a part of Australia where they still have some presence in regional electorates. Who they preference? Again, if they preference the independent over One Nation will make hay of it. If they preference One Nation over the independent will make hay of it. So again, we go back to that left-right pincer that they've been stuck in and will be stuck in everywhere, in every single jurisdiction. Victorian state election, federal election, everywhere. They are in deep, deep trouble. And in the Farrer by-election, you'll have people who live in some of the bigger towns who are not fans of One Nation, but they'll vote for the independent because they think that is the vehicle to stop One Nation from being elected. Labor voters will vote tactically, probably for the independent. There will be a smaller portion of the Labor vote that will go to the One Nation. There's no question about that. Then, of course, the question is how much does One Nation collapse the Liberal primary by? So we've got a bit of a preview of that now, the South Australian election. Regional electorates, they made significant inroads into the Liberal primary. So let's wait and see.
We will wait and see. It's clear that One Nation is hurting Liberals far more than Labor.
Of course,
and we've been saying this for a year.
Yes, a
year plus. It's not a great surprise.
No, there are some of the right wing commentariat out there, and when I refer to them as commentariat loosely because they're not largely in the media, who were hoping to whatever God they pray to, that One Nation was going to inflict severe damage to Labor. Well, bad news, folks. That's not happening, and those individuals who embarked on an anti-immigration narrative for many months, hoping that was going to be the case, welcome to a club where that club is full of champions who've kicked their own goal.
So, how does the Liberal Party respond, Kos? How does it respond? Particularly at a Fed, we are going to turn to Victoria.
Yep.
In a jiffy. Angus Taylor, there doesn't seem to be a coherent narrative or strategy. Interesting, Matt Canavan, the newly elected Nationals leader, seems to have a much more clear-eyed idea about the threat and how to respond to Pauline Hanson. But saying that, that's very much a Queensland and rural and regional New South Wales strategy.
The challenge they've got is going to take years to fix. I see they're indicating that they're going to announce policies and they'll run it through the legacy media, and they'll resort to the tools they're used to and they grew up with. They'll resort to the tools that worked in an era where they were dominant. That includes swapping leaders. That includes going to, look, here's our new policies. This will capture the hearts and minds of people who don't like us anymore. But the best analogy I can use to describe their predicament is that they are, let's say, a particular retail chain that got caught ripping customers off and now wants to basically pretend that didn't happen and say, look, we've got a brand new brand and now we've changed the CEO and our products are better. Come and buy us. No, their customers have moved on and they're shopping somewhere else.
Yes, I mean, it's a huge reckoning, Kos. I think policy is part of it and ideology, and we've been banging this drum for a while. They're still caught within, but next week we're going to touch on Bob Hawke style nostalgia, but
yes,
there is a great deal of nostalgia around the Howard years. I should call them the Howard Costello years, actually, because that best defines the philosophical tenor of those governments. They're very much caught within, very much caught up in nostalgia for that era, which is long gone and actually contains the seeds of the crisis which has been playing out now for at least half a decade.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Liberal Party is viewed by the voters that left them as a significant contributor to the demise of these voters' personal economic health, especially Gen Xers, but also younger Australians. And we have to remind ourselves that since John Howard lost, half of the voters' roll has passed away, right? We've had a complete churn of the electoral roll. It's now close to 50% millennial and Gen Z are enrolled to vote. Baby boomers and older Australians are down to about 28, 27% of the electoral roll. The silent generation's practically all died out now.
But when I talk about policy and ideology, and there's another question of personnel as well, they are not attracting calibre of candidates and leaders. Well, poor old Ashley Hearn there in South Australia. Yeah. She put up an admirable performance, but...
Well, if you're young and you're a professional and you live in the big cities, you're highly unlikely to find the Liberal brand at all appealing.
That's what I'm saying about the Howard era, because that kind of conservative, muscular right-wing populism, that put off that particular cohort of voters.
Yes.
But on the flip side, this is coming through with the Gen X vote, a lot of the policies and the policy settings of the Howard era, which carried through to the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government, they put in terms of the economic elements and that base out in suburban regional Australia, that put off people as well.
That's right, absolutely. I mean, the latter group that you've just mentioned, that's the group that's experienced that economic decline. In previous podcasts, we've gone into detail about what has happened to these individuals, how they look at the world now. Their lives are not going to improve in the next 10 years as they head into retirement. They know that, and they've lost hope in terms of the Liberal Party representing them economically anymore. So they're now voting on grievance and revenge.
Grievance and revenge.
Grievance and revenge.
Sounds like a movie. It's a horror show.
It's a horror movie for the coalition.
For the coalition. But I know you say that it's very likely they'll revert to form. I see today I was reading the Fin Review. They're out there talking about, and the Oz, they're out there talking about punishing visa holders who move cities. Yeah. Very old school play.
Of course.
I'm sure, Kos, in the next 6 months, and particularly after the Victorian state election, where I expect and you expect that One Nation will perform strongly, will cannibalise the coalition vote again. You'll have a growing cohort of your social media right-wing grifters out there, but also actually respected commentators. There'll be a growing clamour suggesting that Andrew Hastie is the solution to these problems.
I'll give him credit.
He can win back that base.
I'll give him credit. He doesn't sound like him, right? So he's already out criticising Trump. He just does things that are totally different, maybe because it comes from the political class. As long as he doesn't get fixated on immigration, because if he wants to be Prime Minister of the country, he's going to have to win some diverse votes, right? But he's someone that does sound different, and you could see he's making comments now that are not within his portfolio, particularly on international relations, cleverly pointing the finger at Trump for the problems that the globe is facing right now. You only have to listen to the conversations at the Bowser petrol stations, who they blame. They're not blaming Albanese for this problem. They're blaming Trump, right? Everyone knows why the price of fuel has gone up. It's got nothing to do with the federal government. Yes,
it was interesting to see Hastie make that intervention, but I think we should be clear-eyed that the problem is brand liberal.
Yes,
the
correct.
problem is brand nationals.
Yes.
And changing leader isn't going to necessarily.
Not necessarily. No,
is not.
No, they have to change. That leader will need to change, like Robert Menzies changed the entire infrastructure of a political movement. That's what sort of change needs to occur.
Yes. Moving on to Victoria, what are the implications from the South Australian vote?
So
Victorian state election.
We could see that in the state. We've talked about the state seat of Elizabeth is a really good example. Well, there's one or two of those seats in Adelaide. There are at least a dozen of those seats in Melbourne, right? And hence the geographic opportunity for One Nation is much larger. You have a Labor brand that's not as popular, and therefore you could see a dynamic where One Nation definitely runs second, but also jumps over Labor in some of these seats that Labor holds and wins them. Flip side, you can definitely see, based on the trends in South Australia, that they will put the coalition under immense stress in regional Victoria. That's both National Party and Liberal Party seats. They will put the coalition under a lot of stress on the small amount of seats they hold in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. But then more importantly, in seats like Hastings, Pakenham and Bass, which on a normal day the Liberals should win back quite easily, Labor currently holds them. There's a question mark now. Does One Nation win all three? Does it win one or two of them? Does it split the Liberal vote so bad that Labor accidentally wins one or two of them? We don't know. This is the big question mark here. I mean, that's the impact. But based on my analysis, the way I see the Victorian landscape as it stands today, and I base this analysis on our Australian Financial Review published poll. So those of you who have not got a copy, you can go and get a copy, or go to my socials and you can download a link. The Labor camp wins 36 seats. The coalition wins 22. One Nation wins 12. Greens 2. There are 16 seats too close to call. Of those, Labor wins 11. Guess who's forming government, right? And apparently, this was the sort of polling that analysis that some of the fools that were trying to undermine Jacinta Allen were shopping around. Well, guess what, sunshines? That analysis illustrates to us she wins. She wins the election. So that's how it stands right now. Now, it's an ugly win. It's an unconventional win. Labor's going to lose a stack of seats. It may lose some to One Nation. It may lose a few to the Liberal Party. It may lose seats they've never even dreamt of losing, and hold seats which, used to be safe Liberal seats, and hold them quite comfortably, like Box Hill, Ashwood. These are seats I expect Labor to do well in now because they're inner urban, middle class, professional, large Chinese diaspora in Box Hill that is very anti-Liberal. these are the sort of electorates that you could expect Labor to do really well in. So we're going to get this election will be one for the textbooks.
It was interesting to see the chatter about a potential leadership challenge to Premier Allen. I mean, the idea that
that won't fix their problem.
The idea, yes, I'm going to let you tee off and really tee off there in a minute. The idea that seeking a fourth term was going to be anything other than a hard-fought, ugly win is delusional. It was seeking a fourth term, bearing in mind a lot of the trends that we've been talking about, that we're not living in 2002, 2006 backslide territory.
You're not asking for a fourth term in normal conventions,
yes.
Right? It's very different. And my criticism is not about those external outside the parliament who are critical of the leadership or think it can't win. My criticism is of people who occupy seats who are internally basically sabotaging their own careers, which is just crazy stuff, right? Asking for a fourth term in a fragmented political environment where, yes, you have probably not done a great job in representing the outer suburbs, taken a lot of seats for granted for far too long, made some pretty serious errors, but the previous administration in particular, that's a hard ask, right? And she may not get there. But right now as it stands, based on the numbers we're seeing, I'd put my money on Labor winning. That could change, right? The one thing that's going for them is, of course, One Nation, who are going to fragment the vote for both major parties. But I think the coalition is going to suffer more than Labor. Yes,
I still think Victorian Labor are going to hang on, because that's one of my 5 predictions for this year. South Australia, that was a doozy. That was easy.
That was easy.
South Australia winning.
Victoria's going to be one for the textbooks.
I've still got my prediction of one Nation peaking and then plateauing is looking a bit dodgy. My prediction of Andrew Hastie becoming leader, I'm hanging on there, because I think the Victorian election might really set things off. How well do you think One Nation will perform in terms of actual? Are we going to see a similar phenomenon where high primary vote not translating into seats, or is Victoria going to buck that trend?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I could see them winning 12 seats. So, Victoria's different. Both major parties' primary votes in the 20s. I think we've not seen the bottom of the coalition vote yet, because we will see now an acceleration of One Nation support across the country. Again, further eating into the coalition base, and to a lesser extent Labor. So they should do well. They will definitely do well in the upper house. Whether I think they'll win one seat in every province. I think we're going to see a drastically different result in Victoria. But as we mentioned, that South Australia was never geographically conducive for them. Victoria's a much more fertile piece of political real estate. Because it's a far more unhappier place.
You got a lot more Elizabeths.
You got a lot more Elizabeths. You got a lot more Giles, the state seat of Giles, where Whyalla is situated. You have many of those seats around the place. You have a lot more, I would say, political fragmentation, unhappiness, the impact of lockdowns. We cannot discount them. Right?
Of course, South Australia, this was a government asking for a second term. I mean, South Australian Labor Party's been in government for most of the last 3 decades. It is, if we are to talk about the natural party of government, it is the natural party of government there. But we had a unique situation where we've got this hawk-like figure in Peter Malinauskas.
Oh, yes. Yeah, he's an absolute political weapon.
So it is more, I think you're right. It is more, the threat is more severe in Victoria, because we've got a government that's been around for a long time.
Yep.
Which was empowered during the COVID years. I was really, really struck by a Substack piece that you wrote, Kos, on the psychological implications
of lockdowns,
lockdowns and COVID, and how that will play out.
Well, it's the most, I would say, underreported, misunderstood impact on the Victorian body politic. In all our research, the one undercurrent that is in Victoria that is different to the rest of the country is a level of anger that is finally surfaced. 2022, the state election in 2022 was too early for that. We had just come out of it. All the psychological literature will tell you it takes a number of years before that PTSD starts to evolve. And in fact, and in that Substack article that I put together, I've actually referenced a number of peer-reviewed analysis of the mental health of Melburnians. Oddly enough, and not surprisingly to anyone, we have been the subject of many studies because we were the most locked down city in the Western world. And there is a psychological consequence for that. So the criticism I have about the Labor camp is that when we came out of the pandemic, there was no caring or nurture. There was no, we broke you, we're going to now help you rebuild your lives. And people are angry about that. I'm critical of people blaming Jacinta Allen for this because, well, yes, she was part of that government, but she's inherited this problem. Going to my point about leadership, whoever you pass the baton to, this problem's still there. You're still the Labor Party. You're still that Labor government. You've been in government since 2014. A new face is not going to change it. And, we'll be talking about this next week about the legacy of the Hawke years, the habit of rolling leaders, which probably actually started
to December 1991.
That's right, correct, right? This notion that you could just keep rolling leaders and it's going to fix your political problems. I think both major parties have got this sickness in their head. It does not fix the problem. We saw that in South Australia, right? Changed leaders. Oh, she performed well. No, she didn't. Got absolutely plastered. This thing, she held her head up high. No, she lost badly, right? You can go right across the country, examples where they've done this. It just does not work. There's probably a couple of exceptions, maybe.
I'm just trying to think of an exception to the rule, cause.
Well, it wasn't the Morrison knocking off Turnbull. I would regard that as not a success. He won 2019 because basically Labor created too much of a larger target for itself. But that win laid the groundwork for the destruction of the Liberal Party, right? That was the start. And so I can't think of an example where rolling leader works.
I mean, even I've got a heretical view because that I think Tony Abbott would have comfortably won the 2016 election.
Probably, yeah.
I think it would have comfortably won. Yeah. Again, that laid the groundwork for a lot of their internal civil wars.
Yeah, but what most Australians under the age of 45 have witnessed in terms of all their enrolment life in this country is both you had Rudd, Gillard, Rudd, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison. I think now there's some political stability federally because, of course, Albanese is successful, but a good decade plus of this self-indulgent behaviour by the political class, breaking the body politic and confidence of the Australian public. And hence, we go back to Victoria. No, changing your leader is not going to fix their problem. Just ask the Liberals.
Correct, Armando, because we're going to be talking about Victoria a lot more on the pod over the year. Thank you very much for your insights. Next week, as I flagged, we're talking to the fantastic Frank Bongiorno about the Hawke era and implications for today's politics. But for now, thank you, Kung Fu Kos. Thank you, listeners. We'll catch you next week. It's ciao, arrivederci.